I got up this morning, it was 5 degrees, wind chill. I don't know what it was with the wind chill, so it was less than that. I couldn't even finish cleaning off my car this morning. I had to get back in the car to warm up again to finish cleaning it off this morning. That's how cold it was at dark 30 this morning. So I'm glad you all made it. But let's talk about summer then. How about that? You ready to talk about summer? I'm going to talk about the exact opposite of what we're experiencing right now. It was actually my family and I were heading on a summer vacation, and with the kids were little, and we were heading to Tennessee for a family reunion to meet folks from Texas. And I'll never forget that trip because we had a minivan, and the air conditioning broke in the minivan, and we had to drive all the way to Tennessee in July, in the July heat and humidity of July, so it was like 90 degrees and humid. I would love to have that today, now that I think about it. It was miserable at the time, but I would choose that one over today's cold. And so we're driving to Tennessee. We had gone online, and when we do this with our family, we communicate, we look online, where could we go, where could our family go? And we found this lakeside resort called Watts Bar Resort in Tennessee, next to Watts Bar Dam Lake, which is in Tennessee. And that's about halfway between Texas and Maryland, sort of. So we all got in our cars and we drove there. We had looked online for this place, and we found it because, you know, the pictures online showed these little cottages in the woods, and they had a swimming pool and a restaurant, and we thought, what a great place for family reunion, and there's a lake there, we can go boating and all this stuff. So we booked it, we put our deposits down, we drove to Tennessee in the heat. And as we're getting to the lake, we're approaching the lake, and we're crossing a bridge across the lake. On the other side of the lake is where the resort is. And not only is the resort on the other side of the lake, but on the horizon I see a nuclear power plant. That's it. That's the Watts Bar Dam nuclear power plant as you go across the bridge over to the resort. And I thought, well, I hope it's not too close. But sure enough, every night we could fall asleep to the glow of the nuclear power plant on the horizon. But we thought, you know, it still could be a great place, right? So we get there. We check in, we get our keys to our cottages, and we take the kids to our cottage, and we get up there, and we can't get in the front door because there's a large bee's nest hanging over the front door on the porch of a 1950s built furnished cottage. So we go back to the front desk, and we turn, you're saying, you know, we got a problem, we need maintenance out here to get rid of the bees because we got small kids. They say, okay, we'll take care of it. And then as I'm leaving, one of my cousins from Texas is coming in the office to talk to the checkout, and she said, and I said, well, we got a bees nest. Well, she's like, you'll never believe what we have at our cottage. Come on over and see. So we drive over, and they had a storm the day before, and a large tree had fallen into the cottage and put a hole in the roof. So they had rented them a cottage with a tree in the roof of the cottage. And there was a hole in the roof. It hadn't been repaired. The tree hadn't been cut up or anything. And so they're coming back to say, we need another cottage. And they're like, oh, we didn't know because of the storm and da-da-da-da. And we're like, okay. So then we said, well, we all got settled in. We finally said, let's all go to the pool. Not much maintenance had been done on the pool either when we got there. Our family actually ended up doing all the pool maintenance that week on the pool so our kids could swim in it. We actually realized that we're just going to have to make the best of it. We're just going to have to chip in. We're going to have to do some things ourselves. We're not going to get 5-star customer service here. We're just going to have to make the best of it. And so we did. But we all felt a little duped. Everything looked beautiful online, and we had lots of hopes and dreams for that vacation, and we get there, and it's not what we expected. Have you ever had that experience? Sometimes that's our experience of our relationships, though, isn't it? Sometimes we get married, and when we get married, we have all these hopes and dreams of this marriage, and we have this great imagined thing that we're going to experience for the rest of our life, and sometimes it doesn't live up to expectations. Sometimes we go to work at a new job and we think this is going to be so much better than our old job, and it's going to be this new great thing, and we think how wonderful it's going to be, and then it doesn't live up to the expectations that we had. Or we buy a new house and we move into a new neighborhood and we think, oh, the neighbors got to be so much better here than in our old neighborhood in our house, and then we realize it's not any better than it was where we were. We have this is a common human experience, isn't it? for all of us. And what do you do when things don't go as expected? How do you make the best of it? And is there a way that love can help us do that? Because Paul's talking this morning about genuine love. He says, let love be genuine. You know, this idea of genuine love is so important, and actually the whole rest of what Paul writes is dependent upon us understanding genuine love. Notice that Paul has stopped writing in run-on sentences. If you've ever read Paul, he likes to do these run-on sentences, just go on and on and on forever. But in this section, in chapter 12, he doesn't do that. He just hits it point after point after point about what genuine love looks like. Now, the word genuine here means sincere, not artificial, not hypocritical, unassuming. And in the first century, this word is associated with something that would actually happen in the marketplace, similar to what I told you about my vacation, is that in the marketplace they would sell these containers for water, clay containers, pots, vessels that people could buy in the marketplace, and they would take those vessels to the well and collect water and bring water home. Remember, they didn't have indoor plumbing then, so they would have to go to a water source and bring the water home in this container. So what the marketplace sometimes would do, some of the sellers of these vessels, is that there would sometimes be hairline fractures in these, and they would be leaky. So the person selling them, not wanting to waste the pot, would take wax and melt wax on the inside of the pot to seal up the crack on the inside so that the pot wouldn't leak. So in the marketplace, it holds water, and so they would show how it holds water and how wonderful it was. Somebody would buy it, and then they would take it home, and they'd set it outside their home, and the sun would hit it, and the wax would melt. Then they'd go to the well to get the water, and all the way home, the thing's leaking all over them as they're walking home. And they realized that they didn't get what was expected. It wasn't the genuine article. It wasn't genuine. They had been duped. And so this word is associated with this idea of genuineness, and genuine love is what Paul's talking about. And here's the question: do we have the capacity? Are we vessels who can have the capacity to genuinely love others, especially when things don't go as expected? What's our capacity to genuinely love others? And the reality is we're all a little cracked. We all have our own flaws and imperfections, so it's challenging to genuinely love other people when we're imperfect and they're imperfect, and so this becomes a challenge for us. So what's our capacity? And I think that we all have the capacity to genuinely love others, and we also have the capacity to genuinely hate others. We have the capacity for both good and evil, for love and hate. And as we go through life, different things happen to us that may increase our capacity to love or increase our capacity to be resentful and hateful and bitter. And so these two things can happen to us. It also depends sometimes on who we're trying to love, right? There are some people that are easier to love than other people. And sometimes when we get into relationships, it sometimes becomes harder to love someone rather than easier to love them, and vice versa. And so we have to think about what does genuine love do in this case? How does genuine love work? And I think first and foremost, Paul has been arguing up until chapter 12 about God's love for us. That God has this genuine love for us, and God proves genuine love for us in this, that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. That while we were God's enemies, Christ gave his life for us. This proves God's genuine love for us. And so what I would suggest to you that our vertical relationship to God's genuine love will impact our capacity to love others and should help us to love other people. Now, let me talk about that a little bit more. Someone recently just sent me a question and sent me an article and sent me a follow-up question about the article. The article was an article about atheists raising good moral children and how atheists could raise these good moral children and how they were loving and kind to others. And so do you need God? The question is, do you need God to be good or to be loving? And my first answer is no. We all have the capacity to love and to be kind and be moral and do good things and to make those choices. We all have that capacity based on how we've been loved and how we have been treated in life or how we see others. So we all have the capacity to go one way or the other. But the person asked this great question. I want to share it with you. As one of our members asked this question about the article, it says, if you subtract the love of the Lord your God, but keep the love your neighbor as yourself part, where does that leave you? Where does that leave you? Good question. You like that question? My first answer would be to that question is that I think we can love others without God, and we can have this capacity. My question is, can we genuinely love others? Or is it based on my needs, what I want, what I need, my subjectivity? And so can I love completely not self-centered? Can I completely take self out of the equation? I think God actually helps me to do that. That my relationship with God is a part of the equation that helps me to genuinely love others. So here's how that works. First of all, if someone is not created by God, who assigns them worth and value? How do we determine that someone else has value and worth, or that they're worth loving, if they haven't been created by a divine creator? How do you do that? Who decides? Who's the arbitrator of that? You know, our founding fathers actually held this principle to be very true in the founding of our nation. And you know this, actually. It's in our Declaration of Independence. You've heard this before. But I want to remind us of that. Jefferson and not Lincoln, he was a little bit too young then, but Jefferson and Franklin and three other guys put this document together, and they said this: we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I don't believe that you can make that statement without the principle that God created people. What gives them that equality? Who assigns that equality? See what I'm saying? So you have to have God in the equation to say that all men are created. And that's what they go on to say, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. So that we get our worth, they understood this, we get our worth and our value because we're created by God. This is a foundational principle not only of our nation, but of the Christian ethic to love other people. We love others because they're worth our love, they're worthy of love because they're created by God. Not because we assign them worth, subjectively. I don't know about you, but I don't want somebody else, another human being, another cracked pot, another flawed, imperfect human being assigning my worth. Because that's problematic. And the reason it's problematic is because of what we see on the news often. Part of the problem is that we all strategically take God out of the equation at times. Whenever we're abusive to someone else, whenever we're hate-filled towards someone else, whenever we do harm to someone else, we're actually taking God out of the equation. We're forgetting God. We're refusing or forgetting or neglecting to see this other person whom we're doing harm to as someone who has been created by God, has worth and value, and is valuable and loved by God. We stop doing that when we do harm. A good example of that, these are extreme examples, but we watch on the news about ISIS taking innocent people and videotaping their execution for the world to see, and we see the injustice in that. And love does confront evil. That's what Paul says. Hate the evil. And so we can see this happening in our world. We can see people who are taking the lives of other innocent people because of their hate, because they have increased their capacity for hate. They've not been increasing their capacity to love. When they do that, they're no longer seeing that person as God sees them. Or take the 3 North Carolina Muslim students that were killed by an American over a parking space in an apartment complex. Hate was fueled, and I think for that person to do that required them to put God on the shelf, to take God out of the equation, to say, I'm going to strategically forget God so that I can harm this other human being. Because I don't believe that you and I could really harm someone if we saw them as God sees them, as people of worth and value, and that they're loved by God. Because if they're loved by God and they're valuable and worthy of love, I don't think we can do that. So we've got to, every time we do that, we're taking God out of the equation. We're not able to have a God be a part of that. So the beauty of knowing God's love is that when we know God's love for us, what should happen is it should increase our capacity to love others. So it should increase our ability to love, and it should decrease our hate and our bitterness and our resentment. When we start to see people as God sees them, not how we want to see them. Does that make sense? So that's a shift in mindset. That's a shift in how we view other people. Now, how that works for me, how do you do this? And I'll just share an example. One of the things I do is most mornings I get up and I read the Psalms. The reason I read the Psalms is because they continually remind me of how much God loves me, of how faithful God is to me, about how God unconditionally loves me with all my flaws and imperfections. And so I have to be daily reminded of that. So every day I go to the scriptures and I let God remind me, hey, Matt, you're worth something. You're valuable. Because I'm a pastor and there are some people that are hard to love. We all know that, right? We all have people in our lives. We know it's hard to love some people. And some people are easier to love, but I know that I'll do a better job at loving other people if I'm in touch with God's love for me. That's how it works. My vertical relationship impacts my horizontal relationships. So for me to be a good pastor means I've got to be solid in my relationship to God and growing in my relationship with God. For me to be a good husband, I've got to be growing in my relationship with God and God's love for me. For me to be a good father, I've got to grow in my relationship with God. For me to be a good coworker, I have to grow in my relationship with God, because as I grow in God's love, I grow in my love and my capacity to love other people. And that's why a relationship with God is so important. And the best thing that we can do for our families, our workplaces, our neighborhoods, is to grow our relationship with a loving God. That's the best thing we could do, because that's how we learn to love genuinely like God loves us genuinely. And once we learn to love genuinely, all this other stuff that Paul writes about in this passage becomes a whole lot easier for us. A whole lot easier for us to persevere in prayer, to be patient in suffering, to hate the evil, to cling to what is good. It even gives us the capacity to love our enemies. It increases our capacity to love our enemies. Paul says that. Paul says that's possible with God's love. So how does that work out? Well, I'll tell you, just wrapping things up, I'll tell you about my own personal example from my own marriage. We started talking about how you can get into a relationship and then things don't go as imagined, and I'm not saying that about my wife at all. Let me disclaimer that. But when you get married, you feel like you have this infinite capacity to love this other person, right? If you've ever been married or been in any relationship where you've fallen in love, you don't have to be married to feel that, to know that. If you've ever fallen in love, you feel like the capacity to love this other person is infinite and could never change. You feel that way, right? Anybody feel that way? Anybody experience it, right? But as you go through that relationship and as time goes by, you realize that your capacity, what used to be infinite, because you fell in love, starts to decrease. Because there are flaws that start to show themselves, cracks in the vessel that start to reveal themselves. And so how do you love genuinely? Because I think that kind of falling in and out of love, feelings, romance, will only sustain you for so long. If we don't move towards genuine love and grow our capacity to genuinely love each other, we can't sustain the relationship. So when I look at my wife, I've learned to genuinely love her for who God created her to be. I see her as God sees her and not just how I want to see her. And when I do that, I'm able to love her better. I'm able to increase my capacity to love her. A good example of that is, I get Fridays are my day off, and I work 6 days out of 7 days a week, and so I've got this one day, and it becomes very sacred to me and it's my Sabbath day. And so I get up in the morning, I go about the day, and I've hopefully gotten a little extra sleep, and I get up, and our lives are very busy. We run around all week long. We both work full-time jobs. Anybody else do that around here? And so I can get on my day off, and I can look around, and the house is just in disarray. Anybody relate to that? The dishes are piled high in the sink. The stuff laying everywhere. Nothing's been taken care of. The bills are stacked up in the box. All that, you hit that, and I just want to go watch ESPN. I just want to go watch the DVR. I want to just vegetate, just chill out, and because it's my day. It's about me, right? And so I could walk into that situation, and I know sometimes I've not always responded appropriately. Sometimes you walk into those contexts in that situation, and you start to blame the other person and become resentful to the other person because of the condition of the environment. You start to blame others and say, well, it's their fault. If she just wasn't, busy, on Facebook all week, maybe we could have this stuff cleaned up, and I could choose to nurture the resentment is what I'm saying, right? But then there are other times where I can make another choice, and occasionally I do this. And what I do is I choose to think about, not because I feel like doing any of that stuff, but I go and I start to clean the dishes and clean up the kitchen and pay the bills and pick up around the house so that when my wife comes home from a stressful week, she feels appreciated. And I do make that choice on occasion. But here's the thing, I don't feel like doing that. I don't feel like doing that at all. But when I make the choice to do that, when I choose to see her as God sees her, as valuable and worthy of my love, guess what happens to me? I fall back in love with my wife. She doesn't even have to be there for that to happen, but just as I make the choice, the decision, the act of the will to love, I find myself loving my wife more. So what's happening? I'm increasing my capacity for genuine love rather than increasing my capacity for resentment or hate towards my spouse. And that's a choice. That's an act of the will. That's what genuine love does. And the only way I can keep doing that is to stay in touch with God's genuine love for me and for others. It's because of Christ's love for us, because of God's genuine love for us, that enables us to truly love those around us. Amen.